Hey, welcome to the Upland Nation podcast. This is one of our insider and insight-filled episodes, kind of a bonus every other week where we take a deeper dive into single subjects, people, and in today's version, let's go hunting. Remember that eclipse a few years back? Well, gosh, it seems like a few years, but it was only a couple. Anyway, we were, by sheer coincidence, at ground zero for that eclipse, and it turned into a magical hunt. So I'm going to recount that hunt for you, maybe get you psyched about this season. Maybe you'll learn something about chukar hunting, quail hunting, and yourself. And that's the whole point. It's all made possible by Cable Gangs, Stakeout Systems, and Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School. Let's pile out of the truck and take a look. Well, this place is magical to begin with. It's literally in the darkest corner of the lower 48 states. And then when you add what they call the annular eclipse of the sun, which was, the perfect place to be was right there. Well, then the juju ascends to another level. And we were right there, smack dab underneath the moon and the sun as they passed by each other, the moon obscuring the sun completely from that viewing point, at least. And which, like I said, happened to be the place I, every other season start hunting chukars for the year. Now, if you're a bird hunter, waiting for that rare alignment of the earth, the sun, and the moon, it's hard. It moves so slowly. Eventually, yes, there's a big black blot. That'd be the moon between the sun and the earth. The sun's rays bleed out around the edges, creating this ring, this fiery ring encapsulating the moon, basically. Now, I'm not one to gush, but it was spectacular. And again, I'm not a superstitious person, but I can't help but think some of the mystery and magic of that day came as a result of being underneath that annular eclipse about 9:30 that morning. We started that weekend at our usual camping place. Or we were going to, at least. But it was full. A place where I've never seen more than 2 other trucks and a couple camps had dozens and dozens of crystal gazers, astronomy nerds, lots of tie-dye clothing and flowing robes, right there together. It was a miniature Burning Man, for lack of a better term. And not that far from that spot, now that I think about it. We ended up getting lucky. A friend had a spot for us in his front yard nearby. More details on that some other time. But as we headed out to start the season, we noticed a big crowd in a particular spot. We were going down the state highway, and a big crowd at the only rest area within 50 miles, I'll bet. We said, what the heck? We're already late. We may as well find out why they're all there. And of all the perfect places to observe the eclipse, that was the most perfect. So everybody was setting up their giant telescopes, and everything from VW vans with wood bumpers and Grateful Dead stickers to just plain old astronomy nerds who were, really kind of psyched. And I can imagine why. They offered us coffee. We got astronomy lessons. We got a peek into some of those planetarium-worthy telescopes, and somebody even had a whole box full of those eclipse glasses so you could look at the sun. And I guess I shouldn't have been surprised because everybody who was there loved this incredible place and mysteries of the natural world, just in our own way. Those folks were looking upward for a sign. We were looking horizontally for a doggone point. Well, even through the glasses that we were given, that spectacle was impressive. Solar power, yeah, I guess so now that I think about it. It was dazzling. And that's before you looked elsewhere. During the eclipse, it does funny things to everything else. For example, the shadows on the ground through the leaves on the trees or through the clouds. They made all sorts of interesting patterns. I got some photos of my buddy Dave with what looked like, if you know trout, brook trout have what they call vermiculations, those kind of lines, wormy lines on their backs, light instead of fish scales. Pretty cool stuff. And then quiet. The birds stopped singing. There was nothing going on as that total eclipse consummated its journey. For just a few moments, black circle, blazing ring, and nobody and nothing making a noise. Soft, foreign. And then as it passed on through, everybody breathed again. And that line of vans and VW Beetles started heading home, wherever that was, in a cloud of incense smoke. Well, we piled back into the truck and headed for our original hunting destination, just a couple hours later than usual, but that was all right. It was worth it. I mean, how many times you get to see that? And the enchantment of a chukar hunt beckoned right there at ground level, somewhere in northern Nevada amongst this lava rock and sagebrush. So we got to one of our spots, parked, and looked at the slope, and in its own way, it had much the same allure. It was kind of the polar opposite of a polar night sky, in that it was that light brown sage covered landscape that also harbors dozens and dozens of bits of obsidian per square yard. And if you're standing in the right place at the right time, you hold your mouth correctly, you can see them all glinting in the sunlight. We're hunting up that slope. The dogs are doing their job and we're doing our job until I stopped and leaned over to investigate a big blob. And this, for some reason, some of these obsidian rocks end up being smooth. They call them Apache tears. I know, but that's what they look like. They're rough on the side that you can see, but if you turn them over, they're smooth, reflective, very, very beautiful. So I was looking at that thinking, that's pretty cool, and I haven't seen one of those yet today, so maybe, there's Flick on point. He's quite a ways off, a couple hundred yards probably. I look at the collar, control and start heading for him. About halfway there, he turns his head a little bit to make sure I'm on the way. And I'm negotiating through the sagebrush and over the boulders and around the little boulders. But the birds got up. All 20 of them, way before I was in gun range. Except for one. I was downhill. Uncharacteristically, the covey went uphill when they flew, except for the one who, manifesting his own destiny and the way most chuckers do it most of the time, he flew downhill as well. And for once, my number 6 copper-plated shot joined up with a chucker in the right place at the right time. Well, if that wasn't a sign almost equivalent to that rare celestial event we'd witnessed, I don't know what was. We continued our exploration of some of the wrinkled landscapes that, if giants had to spend a day in bed playing with toy soldiers, they'd build their bedclothes into canyons and mountains and valleys, and that's what it looked like. Every once in a while, we found stone cairns, rock piles, taller than a man. We found what may as well have been the back of a dragon, those rock spiny things. Lots of those volcanic shelves, I guess, but more vertical. We found opals and lots of thunder eggs. Those are the ugly-looking, knobby, round-ish rocks. But when they break open, the interior is like a little crystal cave. All that stuff, I know, prompted by the eclipse and maybe some other things, just reminded us that there's more to this world than just walking around on it. We need to appreciate it a lot more. And that message dug deep into my psyche, possibly because of that. Well, you get to a certain point and that dust starts filling your noses, yours, your dog's. You're still hunting, but you're almost tasting it. The wind kept beckoning dogs towards the summit and then towards the next summit. We were heading up, catching breath, headed up, catching breath. Soles of our feet, knees aching. Then old Buster, the Labrador, trundled kind of a kitchen-sized patch of bunch grass. He just stopped, flat-footed, and looked at Dave. And that's when the covey rose. You've seen those videos, if you haven't been to Las Vegas, at Bellagio, I think it's Bellagio, where the fountains just erupt, all the time. That's what that covey rise was like. Birds going right, birds going left, over our head, the other way. It was hard to pick a target, but I was taught, and sometimes I actually remember it, focus on one bird, don't flock shoot. Little harder when they're popping up all over the place. But yes, we missed every one. And we'll blame it on the sun in our eyes. Well, later that day, we crept toward this kind of gorge. And if you've seen the movies of those Lord of the Rings novels and all the spin-offs, this could have been a candidate for one of the scenes. It turns out to be about a 500-foot tall gash, 2 volcanic walls with this creek running through it. I don't know what kind of geology created that opening, but it's spectacular. Like I said, there's a trout stream down the middle, not big enough to fish without feeling guilty about it, but it does mean water in a desolate desert landscape. And at its mouth, the far side of that gorge, it pools out. It creates a resting place for fish and also valuable hydration for the birds. It widens, it deepens, it slows, and the banks are full of willows. We were headed for that part of this hunt when Flick slowed and then kind of tiptoed into a point. Now I know, of course, why he wasn't so sure of himself. We were on flat ground. But a pair of chuckers rose from the flat ground, surprised both of us shooters so completely. Well, Dave didn't even close his gun. I was a little more on the ball. And those birds seem to slow down. You've ever had that experience? They seem to slow down as you make your gun mount. Yeah, I tamed my waving muzzle just enough to double on chuckers on flat ground. I'll never forget that, believe me. We've since gone back. All we've seen there are valley quail. I'm not complaining, but you know what I mean. You're always going to go back to a place like that, the scene of the crime, such as it is. Was it luck, or did that eclipse do something to the density of the air or the behavior of the birds or to my shooting ability? I don't know. I thank my dog for finding them. I thank Dave for not shooting. And I thank my shooting instructors over the years for helping me actually get that gun in the right place at the right time. And then a nod to the cosmos. Yeah, the only thing more rare than an annular eclipse is a double by me. Now, me and my buddy Dave, we've been hunting together a long time and making music before that and fishing the entire time. We learn slowly, but we do learn. So we went in search of another broken up covey that we'd seen fly wild in the distance. It was quail. You can tell. They fly different. Even from a distance, you can see that they're smaller. I got to the spot up against the creek where the brush was about head high. Dave took the clear ground, and I was just kind of bushwhacking through all of this stuff, making sure I didn't fall into little gullies every once in a while. Took a breath and looked at my feet, and here was a tiny, perfectly made fire ring. It couldn't have been more than 12 or 14 inches across. It also had its own little fire laid in it, ready for anybody who needed to come along, maybe from Lilliput or from the Munchkins from somewhere over the rainbow. They could have hunkered down, lit the fire, and roasted their own little marshmallows right there. You know, that just intrigued me so much. And you've seen places like this. You found something like this and wondered, just like I did, who went to that trouble? I mean, what are the odds that somebody else is actually going to find it in a vast valley full of head-high brush? And here's one opening, maybe 10 feet across, and this little tiny campfire. A kid, bored kid, some prankster, or maybe it was aliens from outer space. I don't know, but the vibe was totally out of this full-sized world. Luckily, I didn't have much more time to ponder that because Dave shot a couple birds off of old Buster's flush, and we were back in the action. We were here for chuckers, but when you run into valley quail like that, you got to work them because they are so cooperative for a pointing dog. We headed for kind of a nearby slope thinking some of those birds had gone up there. So I'm working around a kind of a truck-size boulder going up this pretty steep slope. At the top is about 100-foot drop-off in the other direction, so I was a little leery of putting Flick up there, but he was doing fine, and he was below all of that. The scary part was somebody over time had fallen off that cliff a few times. There's wild horse and cattle bones at the bottom, and I didn't even want to get any deeper into identifying other bones there. But it was an eerie place to start a climb, and that helped us pick up the pace just a little bit. Get out of there as quickly as possible. I'll tell you how that hunt works out in just a moment. First, a quick word here on the Upland Nation podcast, Insider Edition from Cable Gangs. I want you to go there and look at the quality of their tie-out stakes. They have solved all the problems, all the gripes, all the pet peeves you've had with your other cheaper tie-out stakes. Stronger cap welds, bigger gaps on the swivel sleeve so it doesn't compress. D-ring attachments that are plasma cut, made out of 1/4-inch plate, welded so that when you miss a strike on the head and you hit that, it's not going to fall off. Go to cablegangs.com, cablegangz.com, and learn more about Cable Gangs tie-out systems. And then midvalleyclays.com may be Subgauge Central for you. It may be your source for hard-to-find shotguns, and it is certainly your source for Browning shotguns. Massive inventory of Brownings, including a demo gun in the Browning A5 and 20 gauge. Dave Fiedler is the shotgun guru there. Call him. Get the number at midvalleyclays.com. Talk about what you're looking for. See if he's got it in stock. If it's a hard-to-find gun, I'll bet he can get it. Check it out. Go to the gun room and go to the pro shop at midvalleyclays.com. All right, where were we? Oh, I'm Scott Linden. This is the Upland Nation podcast. This is an insider edition where we're exploring on the day of that big annular eclipse a couple years back. We're headed up that slope, trying to stay far enough away from that cliff that we don't become the bleached bones at the bottom. And that was a lot easier when we started here in Chuckers at the top. This cliff ends up being the drop-off at the bottom of a long draw. It's pretty big, almost amphitheater-like, but it goes for a couple miles due south. And we heeled the dogs away from the cliff and started working upstream. Yeah, that cliff becomes a waterfall a couple times a year. And on this trip, there was still a couple pools that the dogs could cool off in. But not for long, because as Flick and I were admiring that, enjoying that, Dave shot a bird. He'd found those sons of guns. We'd chased a lot of those running birds from the stream bed to an abandoned guzzler, to an old cow camp, to the only tree we've ever found in that whole valley. They crested the ridge and launched over the top and out of sight. Except for one. He landed in that juniper, the one tree. Both dogs had seen him, and like hounds, they beelined toward it. Old Buster, too old and wobbly to do it, but Flick's got his front paws on the trunk just like a red red-boned hound, baying a little bit. He knows better than to do that, but frustrated, as would anybody be, that he couldn't climb and flush that bird, even though he's not supposed to. I don't blame him. And I know that bird had a smug look on his face until we caught up with the dogs. I volunteered to set the gun down and throw rocks, and sure enough, one of them scared that bird into flight, and it met with Dave's shot string, and the chucker gene pool is better for it, I'm sure. We split up because there are big blobs of rock everywhere in that country. I don't know how they got here. They're even a different kind of rock than the columnar basalt that makes up most of these valleys. As I'm on the left side going around, Dave's on the right side going around, and I hear his shot because old Buster the Lab had pushed some birds into the air. You know, they'll often kind of hole up against a rock face when there's no other cover. Most of the birds that survived fled down the hill. One went back up the hill, and I actually saw him land. Their feet are already moving when they hit the ground, and he started running up the hill. But I heeled Flick to me because I didn't want him to catch up too soon. And we kind of trudged up the slope, hoping that bird would stop and hide somewhere along the way if he didn't feel like we were pressuring him too much. Kind of hard to be quiet on some of those slopes. They're full of rocks. I think the mountain climbers call it scree. You know, vast reaches of small rocks that you've got to walk on, and you got to walk on them carefully because they're very loose. By the time I crossed one of those, and they're in big bands that go down the slope sometimes, so I crossed one, get on more solid ground, and realized that Flick wasn't following me anymore. He was still on that scree, on point. He's looking kind of up and a little behind him. So I kind of did the best I could in terms of sneaking towards the bird. But, of course, kicked down a few rocks. The bird went straight up. I spun to shoot on him. Both feet went out from under me. The bird stopped flying and started dying about the time my knees hit two more rocks. Well, by the time I realized there was nothing fractured, Flick was back with the chucker in his mouth. You might call it luck, I might call it luck, or I might think cosmological intervention. I thank my lucky stars, such as they are, watered Flick and put that bird in my vest. Well, we ran out of slope, started side hilling south until a taller ridge came into view. Dave was in the lead, and he was uphill from me. That's kind of how you do it if you can help it. As I came around the point, he was already standing under this backlit rock arch that I'd never heard of in this country. In fact, later that day, I stopped and talked to the manager of this wildlife refuge, and he said, "Where? I'd never seen that." So I gave him a pin, and hopefully the big boss actually saw one of the most spectacular things that there was out there. It was 100 feet across and 50 feet high, and the sun was in the exact right place so that when I came around that bend, Dave and his dog were right in the middle of it, framed and backlit. I got some pictures on findbirdhuntingspots.com. It's worth a look. Yeah, in fact, it's more than a look. It was the kind of setting where you imagine, one of those angel choruses breaking into song. But we heard chukars, so sent the dogs through and on to the next little draw on the backside of that, which is, of course, when the covey erupted, right into the sun. That whole backlit thing, well, it wasn't anymore. It was right here in our eyes. Coincidence? I don't know. Maybe. I know when a celestial phenomenon starts your day, it kind of rides shotgun with you the entire day. You second guess everything. You attribute magic to the things that went right or magic to the things that went wrong. But when we saw these gigantic petroglyphs on a sheer rock wall about 300, 400 feet above us, we tightened our bootlaces and loaded our guns as we started heading for this secret mystical message from ancestral hunters. But no, if you got up close enough, you recognized the pattern and the color and the smell. We got critters, you call them pack rats, we call them bushy-tailed wood rats. They live up there in that country, and they go to the same spot to pee every time. I don't know how many thousands of generations of bushy-tailed wood rats had to pee in these spots to make these abstract, full-body pictures of spacemen, but they did. Well, the bonus to that climb was underneath the so-called rock art that was pack rat pee, there's a little 10-foot shelf. It had a couple little arches in it along the way, and the biggest assemblage of chukar poop I've ever seen. Yeah, I've seen a lot of it, but this was unbelievable. 10 feet wide and probably 40 yards long. Obviously, that's where they spend the nights. Now, given the time and enough patience, we could have hung under that and pass-shot birds all afternoon. But the dogs wouldn't hold still, and we had better things to do. I can't sit still for that. I'm not a duck hunter. I'm not a turkey hunter. I'm not a whitetail hunter for that reason. So we thanked the bird gods and headed cross-slope to a flat spot. And if you're up in that country and you find an actual horizontal flat spot of some sort, all the better. Almost always worth a walk through. This one had rocks every once in a while. I won't call it a bowling alley and arranged like bowling pins, but there was a little bit of that feel to it. They were big enough to where they would push the breeze around. So it was tough work for the dogs. But we'd hear one or two calling up there, and I know they had to be calling for something down here. And sure enough, at some point, Flick hits a point, and one chukar against one of those rocks blasted off from the far side. But I was in a place where I could hit it, and I did. My best shots are instinctive. If I have to think about shooting, I'm going to miss. If I don't have to think, I might hit. He landed in a patch of bunch grass, and I got to it before Flick did. He looked like he'd been displayed by a taxidermist. That's how beautiful it was. I let Flick bring it back. But I wonder who'd arranged those rocks. I mean, it was a perfect scenario. Maybe there really is a higher order of astronomical things, or maybe it was just the right volcanic eruption. I don't know. But I gave Flick a good stroke on his back, thanked him, and we headed further uphill. Yeah, we missed our fair share, but I blame that on all the usual stuff. The curvature of the earth, the sun in my eyes, holding my mouth wrong, bad gun mount, and I always can fall back on cross-dominant eyes. Sometimes I gave Dave credit. When we both shoot, it's almost always his bird. So there's no arguments. Who needs them? But we never really blamed all the misses, or all the hits for that matter, on that incredible astronomical miracle that we had seen that morning. That mind-expanding experience. Most people never have. Yeah, we disappointed the dogs on occasion. We laughed at each other's stumbles and misses. We constantly marvel at the places we go, like a giant playground. I mean, giant's playground. Boulders like building blocks, piles of earth, magnum caliber sandboxes. Well, that night we didn't have another eclipse, but we did have a nice warm spring to soak in, and more stars than Neil deGrasse Tyson could name in a lifetime of his self-absorbed social media posts. Milky Way out there every night. We kind of recounted some of the hits and misses, the wonderful dog work, and thank the natural world we're privileged to explore. You know, we talk a lot about volcanic action, and that's, of course, what made that spring hot and allowed us to relax a little as we watched the nighttime version of incredible astronomy. Well, there is one adventure in Chucker Country that I hope you enjoyed. It was fun to talk about. It was fun to do. Seeing that eclipse, of course, added a little bit more icing to a cake that's also gigantic and fully iced to begin with. Appreciate your listening. If you like what you hear, please tell one person. Leave a comment at the social platforms, a rating or a review at Apple Podcasts. We're made possible by Cable Gang's Stakeout Systems and Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School. That's cablegangs.com and midvalleyclays.com. I'm Scott Linden. Thanks for listening.